It was an ordinary afternoon in a quiet Texas town, the kind of place where time moves slow and everyone knows everyone. The sun spilled warm light through the front windows of Miller's Diner, painting the old checkerboard floor in gold. A bell jingled as the door opened, and in walked a man who looked like any other traveler. Worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and a calm smile that carried a lifetime of stories. It was Chuck Norris. But nobody inside seemed to notice, and at least not yet. He took a seat in the far corner, the kind of spot you choose when you're there for peace, not attention. The waitress, Sally, recognized the gentleness in his eyes before she recognized his face. "Coffee in the special?" she asked. Chuck nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." At the other end of the diner, a group of 5 teenage boys crowded into a booth. They were loud, restless, showing off like teenage boys do when they think the world belongs to them. Phones out, laughter echoing. They filmed pranks for social media. When the waitress delivered Chuck's meal, a simple plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, one of the boys smirked. "Watch this," he whispered to his friends. As he strutted by, he accidentally kicked the edge of Chuck's table. The plate flipped, the coffee spilled, and the meal hit the floor with a crash. The sound froze the entire diner. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. The boys laughed under their breath, trying to look tough. The waitress gasped, reaching for napkins. Chuck didn't shout. He didn't stand. He just looked down at the mess, then up at the boy, very calm, steady, and silent. His expression didn't carry anger, only disappointment. For a full 5 seconds, nobody breathed. The teenagers waited for him to explode, but he didn't. He simply exhaled, reached for a napkin, and started cleaning the table himself. Sally whispered, "Sir, I'll take care of it." Chuck shook his head gently. "It's all right, ma'am. Things happen." The boys exchanged nervous glances. The silence was heavier than any words he could have said. What Chuck did next, nobody in that diner would ever forget. The sound of shattered glass and clinking silverware still echoed in the quiet diner. Everyone waited for the man in the flannel shirt to react, to get angry, to scold, to do something. But Chuck Norris didn't move. He simply continued wiping the spilled coffee with a calm precision, as if nothing unusual had happened. The waitress, Sally, returned with a towel, clearly shaken. "I am so sorry, mister," she began, realizing who he was halfway through the sentence. Chuck gave her a small smile. "No harm done, ma'am. Just another day." That same kindness, that quiet calm, made the moment even more uncomfortable for everyone else. At the booth across the room, the 5 teens exchanged uncertain looks. Their laughter had died, but embarrassment rarely humbles the arrogant right away. The tallest one, clearly the self-appointed leader, muttered, "What? It was an accident." His friends chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush it off. Sally set down a new cup of coffee and hurried to fetch another plate. As she walked away, one of the teens snorted. "Old guy probably spilled it himself." The others laughed again, but this time it was forced and nervous. The energy in the room had shifted. Chuck heard them. Of course he did. But he stayed silent, hands folded on the table, gaze soft but steady. A man at the counter shook his head. "You boys ought to show some respect." The teens rolled their eyes. "Relax, man. We were just joking." Chuck looked up at them finally, not with anger, not even with disappointment this time, but with a patience that only made them feel smaller. "Jokes are supposed to make people smile," he said softly. Not ashamed. The diner went completely still again. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to fade. The teens froze for a second, then one of them scoffed, trying to regain his false confidence. "Oh, come on, old man. You gonna lecture us now?" Chuck didn't answer. He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and smiled faintly. That small gesture, his calm control, was more intimidating than any raised voice could ever be. The leader sneered, louder this time. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Sally returned just in time to hear that, her face turning red with frustration. "That's enough," she said firmly. "You boys are about 2 seconds away from being thrown out." The tallest boy laughed. "By who, you?" Before Sally could reply, another customer, a middle-aged man in a leather jacket, stood up from the corner. "By all of us," he said sharply. The room murmured in agreement. The teens exchanged glances again, realizing they might have pushed too far. But Chuck quietly raised his hand. A simple gesture, and the entire diner went quiet again. "No need for that," he said in that steady, unmistakable Texas tone. "They're just young. They'll learn." He turned his attention back to his meal as if the whole thing didn't matter. But for those watching, it did. Everyone could feel it, the weight of calm authority. The boys didn't know how to respond. They weren't used to someone who didn't fight back, didn't curse, didn't lose control. The leader leaned toward his friend and whispered, "Who does he think he is?" From the next booth, an old man chuckled quietly. "You really don't know, do you?" The teens frowned. "Know what?" The old man smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." Chuck glanced up again, the ghost of a smile forming at the edge of his mouth, as if he knew what was coming next, too. "If you were sitting in that diner right now watching this play out, what would you do? Step in to defend the man or stay quiet and watch how it ends? And tell me, which country and city are you watching this story from?" The leader slumped back in his seat, trying to act unbothered. "Whatever, man. I'm not scared of some cowboy." But inside, his confidence was cracking. Every time Chuck looked his way, calmly, silently, it felt like the man could see straight through him. The silence was unbearable now. The laughter was gone, and one by one, people began taking out their phones, recording the scene. The teens whispered nervously, "Why are they filming? Dude, what's happening? Why is everyone staring at him?" Chuck sat back, relaxed, almost amused. He knew exactly what they were about to discover, and he didn't need to say a single word to prove it. The crowd watched as the tension thickened like fog. Something was coming. Not a fight, not violence, but something that would leave those boys speechless for the rest of their lives. The boys thought they'd humiliated a stranger, but they had no idea who was sitting in front of them. What happened next would turn this quiet diner into the most unforgettable moment of their lives. The air inside Miller's diner was thick now, not with noise, but with a silence so heavy it made every heartbeat sound loud. The 5 teens, once full of swagger, now sat shifting in their seats, pretending not to care. But their fake smiles couldn't hide it. Something about that quiet man's calm was eating at them. Chuck Norris sat still, sipping his coffee, eyes steady. He didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He just was. And somehow that was more powerful than any reaction they could have provoked. The leader of the group, a tall, thin boy named Ryan, leaned back and forced a laugh. "Man, this guy's weird. Can't even take a joke." His friends laughed weakly, glancing around for approval that wasn't coming. The rest of the diner had turned against them. The trucker at the counter folded his arms. The waitress glared from behind the coffee pot. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen window, muttering, "Fools don't know who they're dealing with." Ryan noticed the stares and puffed his chest out again, needing to prove he wasn't scared. He stood up and took a step toward Chuck's table. "Hey, old man," he said mockingly. "You got a problem or something?" Chuck set his coffee down slowly, his movements deliberate. He looked up, his calm eyes locking on Ryan's. For a second, and just 1 second, the teen felt something strange. It wasn't fear exactly. It was respect, forced upon him by presence alone. Chuck's voice was soft but steady. "You know, I've met a lot of tough guys in my life. They all had one thing in common." Ryan tilted his head. "Yeah, what's that?" "They never had to prove it." The words hit like a punch. No yelling, no threats, just truth. The diner went dead silent again. Even the teens stopped smirking. Ryan laughed nervously. "You trying to sound wise or something?" Chuck didn't respond. He just stared, calm as ever. That silence. It made Ryan's laugh die in his throat. He tried again. "Man, I don't care who you are." The cook shouted from the kitchen, "Boy, maybe you should." The crowd chuckled, tension breaking just enough for people to whisper. Ryan's face flushed red. He hated being laughed at. In a burst of anger, he slammed his hand down on Chuck's table. "Don't talk to me like that." Coffee spilled again, but this time Chuck didn't even flinch. He just looked up, expression unchanged. Then with slow precision, he stood. It was like watching a mountain rise. The teens took a step back instinctively. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Chuck wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. His calm radiated authority, the kind that comes from decades of discipline, not aggression. He stepped closer to Ryan, but not threateningly. His voice remained low, measured. You think respect comes from fear, but fear fades, son. Respect lasts. Ryan's hands trembled slightly, hidden in his pockets. His friends looked down at their phones, suddenly quiet, realizing the videos they were recording weren't going the way they expected. If someone disrespected you like this, would you walk away or teach them a lesson the way Chuck did? Tell me in the comments. Chuck glanced at the other teens, all of them now staring at the floor. He continued softly, almost like a teacher rather than a fighter. Strength isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting them up when you could have knocked them down instead. The words sank deep. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore, it was respectful. Then Chuck did something unexpected. He smiled gently, stepped back, and motioned toward the mess on the floor. Come on, son. Help me clean this up. That's how you make things right. Ryan hesitated. His pride battled with his conscience. The entire diner watched, waiting to see what he would do. Finally, with a shaky breath, Ryan bent down and began picking up the pieces of the broken plate. His friends followed quietly, one by one. Chuck helped too, not to humiliate them, but to show grace. When the last piece was thrown away, Chuck wiped his hands on a napkin and nodded. Good mistakes don't define you. What you do after them does. The waitress smiled, eyes glistening. The customers clapped softly, not for a fight, but for the lesson they'd just witnessed. Ryan looked up at Chuck, voice small. You're Chuck Norris, aren't you? Chuck smiled. I used to be. These days I'm just a man who likes his coffee hot. Laughter filled the diner, not mocking, but genuine. The tension was gone, replaced by a warmth no one expected after what they'd just seen. As Chuck sat back down, the teens quietly returned to their booth, humbler, quieter, changed. The crowd thought it was over, but they were wrong, because what happened next would make every person in that diner stand and cheer. For a few minutes after that quiet lesson, the diner felt peaceful again. The tension that had once filled the air had dissolved into something softer, almost sacred. The 5 teens sat silently in their booth now, phones face down, shoulders low. Their earlier laughter had been replaced by thought, real uncomfortable thought. They had walked in trying to look tough. Now they were learning what real toughness looked like. And it didn't need to make noise. Chuck Norris quietly finished his coffee. His plate was gone, his breakfast ruined, but his calm never wavered. He looked content, not because things went his way, but because he'd handled them his way. Sally, the waitress, walked over and whispered, You handled that real fine, sir. Most folks would have yelled or walked out. Chuck smiled. Anger's easy, he said. Grace takes strength. She blinked, recognizing something in his voice. That steady tone, that presence. Her eyes widened. Wait a second, she whispered, leaning closer. Are you? Before she could finish, the cook burst through the kitchen door, wiping his hands on his apron. He pointed, eyes wide. Hold up, is that Chuck Norris? The entire diner froze again. Ryan's friends looked up in shock, mouths falling open. The trucker at the counter turned around, eyes wide. Sally gasped, dropping her notepad. Chuck sighed softly, not annoyed but resigned, and gave a small smile. I was hoping we could skip that part, the cook laughed. No way, you're the Chuck Norris, Walker, Texas Ranger. Delta Force, the legend himself. Within seconds, everyone inside the diner was buzzing with disbelief. Phones came out again, but this time not for mockery or pranks. They were filming in awe. Ryan's face went pale. His friends whispered, Bro, you kicked Chuck Norris's meal off the table. Another added, We're dead, man. We just disrespected the Chuck Norris, but Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't make a show of it. He stood slowly, looking at the boys again. The same calm, steady eyes that had silenced them minutes ago. See, now you understand, he said softly. You never know who you're dealing with. That's why respect matters, and for everyone. Ryan nodded quickly, his bravado gone. Sir, I'm sorry. We were just... Chuck raised a hand gently. No excuses. Just be better next time. He walked toward the counter, pulled out his wallet, and handed Sally a generous tip. For the trouble, he said. But Sally shook her head. Oh no, Mr. Norris, I can't take that. You just gave this whole place a story they'll never forget. Chuck chuckled, the kind of laugh that warms a room. Then at least let me pay for their breakfast, he said, pointing toward the 5 boys. Everyone turned. The teens looked stunned. Ryan stammered, "Sir, you don't have to do that." Chuck smiled. "I don't have to, I want to. Call it a fresh start." The cook shook his head in disbelief. "Man, the world needs more people like you." Chuck just shrugged. "We all get chances to do the right thing. Most of us just walk past them." The energy in the diner changed completely. Where there had been shame and tension, now there was admiration. People were smiling, whispering to each other, recording this unbelievable moment. Ryan looked down at the floor, then back up at Chuck. "You know, I thought being strong meant looking tough, but you didn't even have to say much." Chuck placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Real strength isn't in your fists. It's in your choices." It wasn't said like a lecture. It was gentle, almost fatherly. The boy nodded slowly. His friends followed suit. "We're really sorry," one said. "We were stupid." Chuck smiled again. "You're not stupid. Just young. Learn from it." A few customers clapped softly again. Someone shouted, "That's the real Texas Ranger right there," and the diner burst into light applause. Chuck gave a small bow, trying not to make a spectacle. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in peace. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back one last time. "You boys remember this. The internet will forget your prank in a day, but people remember how you make them feel forever." Ryan swallowed hard and nodded. "I will, sir. I promise." Chuck tipped his hat to Sally, to the cook, to the customers. Then with that same calm stride he had when he entered, he stepped out into the Texas sunlight, disappearing as quietly as he'd arrived. Outside, a few people waiting for tables turned their heads, whispering, "Was that Chuck Norris?" The answer spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the diner was buzzing with energy, phones flashing, voices overlapping, and as Ryan watched from the window, he whispered to his friends, "We messed with a legend, and he still treated us better than we deserved." One of them nodded. "Guess that's what makes him one." The story didn't end there, because when the video hit social media later that night, millions around the world saw what real respect looks like. By the next morning, Miller's diner looked the same. Same sunlight, same coffee smell, same checkered floor. But online, everything had changed. Someone in the diner the day before had uploaded the video. Chuck Norris calmly cleaning up his own spilled breakfast after a group of teens mocked him, and then teaching them respect without throwing a single punch. It started small, a few hundred views, then a few thousand, and by noon millions, across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. People were sharing it under hashtags like trying Chuck Norris respect and our power of calm. The clip showed Chuck's quiet strength, the calm stare, the soft-spoken wisdom, and the stunned silence of those 5 boys realizing who he really was. News outlets picked it up next. Chuck Norris humiliated in diner, but what he did after shocked everyone. Comment sections overflowed with admiration. This is how real men handle disrespect. That's the kind of example the world needs right now. He didn't fight them. He taught them. Within 24 hours, the video hit 50 million views. Meanwhile, in a small house just outside town, Ryan sat at his desk staring at his phone, eyes wide. The video of himself, smirking, spilling Chuck's meal, then standing frozen in shame, was everywhere. His mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Ryan, is this you?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah. And that's Chuck Norris?" He nodded again. She sighed, not angry, just disappointed. "You embarrassed yourself, son. But more than that, you disrespected someone who showed you nothing but kindness." Ryan swallowed hard. "I know, Mom, I already said sorry. He forgave me." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Then maybe it's time you show the world you meant it." Ryan didn't sleep that night. The weight of the internet's eyes on him was heavy. Comments calling him names, memes, criticism. But mixed in with the noise were reminders of Chuck's words. Mistakes don't define you. What you do after them does. So the next morning he made a decision. He met up with his 4 friends, all of them just as embarrassed. Together they filmed a short video standing outside Miller's diner. Ryan spoke directly to the camera. "Hey everyone, yeah, we're the kids from that Chuck Norris video. We did something stupid, really stupid. We were trying to be funny and we disrespected a man who deserved better. But he didn't yell. He didn't fight us. He taught us. And we'll never forget that." He paused, looking into the camera, voice trembling. "Mr. Norris, if you see this, thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." They posted it online. Within hours, it went just as viral. The comment section flipped from anger to admiration. "Takes courage to own up like this. Respect, kids. You learned the lesson well." Then something incredible happened. Chuck Norris himself shared their video. His caption was simple: "Proud of these young men. Everyone makes mistakes. Not everyone chooses to grow from them." The internet exploded. Even celebrities reposted it, calling it the most wholesome viral moment of the year. Ryan's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He smiled, not out of pride, but relief. For the first time, people weren't laughing at him. They were learning with him. Later that week, Ryan returned to Miller's Diner. Chuck was sitting in his usual corner. Same flannel shirt, same calm presence. Ryan approached quietly. "Sir?" Chuck looked up and smiled. "Hey, Ryan, you did good." Ryan sat down, nervous but grateful. "I wanted to thank you in person again, for not making me feel small." Chuck chuckled. "Didn't need to. Life already gives us enough chances to feel small. It's up to us whether we rise or stay there." Ryan nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You were right. Respect isn't about fear." Chuck smiled. "That's the hardest lesson to learn. But once you do, it sticks." They talked for nearly an hour, not about fame or fighting, but about life, discipline, and choices. When Ryan left, he felt lighter, not because he met a celebrity, but because he'd met a man worth becoming like. If someone disrespected you in public, would you react with anger like most people, or calm like Chuck Norris did? Tell me below, because how you respond defines your strength. By the weekend, the story had reached every major news site. Reporters called it the Chuck Norris lesson the world needed. Talk shows discussed it, schools used it in morning assemblies, and motivational speakers quoted his words. Even Chuck's old movies saw a spike in views, people drawn not to his fighting skills but to the quiet wisdom behind them. And in that small Texas diner, business boomed. Tourists came from miles away hoping to sit where Chuck Norris once sat, sip coffee from the same mug, and feel a little of that energy that had turned a moment of disrespect into a global message of humility. As for Chuck, he didn't care about the fame. He kept coming back to that same corner seat, same breakfast, same smile. Sally once asked, "Doesn't it feel good, all this attention?" Chuck smiled. "Attention fades, character doesn't." He looked out the window as the sunlight spilled across the diner floor, a soft peace on his face. "The world doesn't need more tough guys," he said quietly. "It needs more men who stay calm when they could have chosen chaos." And with that, he took another sip of his coffee. Warm, simple, steady. Just like him. But the story wasn't done yet, because what Chuck said next in one final interview left the entire world speechless. It had been 2 weeks since the diner incident, 2 weeks since Chuck Norris turned a small act of disrespect into a worldwide lesson in humility. But the story wasn't fading. It was growing. Talk shows, podcasts, and international news outlets couldn't stop talking about it. Headlines read, "Chuck Norris wins the internet without throwing a punch. A legend teaches the world respect." And when Chuck finally agreed to appear in a short TV interview, the entire world tuned in. The host smiled nervously as the cameras rolled. "Mr. Norris, the internet has crowned you the calmest man alive. Millions say you handled that diner situation like a saint. What was going through your mind?" Chuck leaned back in his chair, that same quiet confidence in his posture. He smiled, his voice deep and steady. "Honestly, I just remembered something my mother used to say. If someone tests your patience, that's your chance to show strength without anger." The audience went silent, hanging on every word. He continued, eyes thoughtful. "I've spent my whole life learning how to fight, but it took me years to learn when not to." The host leaned forward. "So, you weren't angry?" Chuck smiled. "Anger's easy. Control is hard. And control, that's real power." His words hit home. The internet replayed that line thousands of times, making it one of the most quoted moments of the year. Then the host showed him a clip, the one of Ryan and his friends apologizing publicly, standing outside Miller's diner. Chuck watched quietly, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Those boys reminded me of myself at their age," he said softly. "We all make mistakes. The question is, do we let them define us or refine us?" The studio erupted in applause. Across the world, people felt something shift. In a time when online drama, outrage, and revenge seemed to rule the internet, here was a man reminding everyone of something simpler: grace. Later that night, Chuck returned home to his quiet ranch outside Dallas. No cameras, no reporters, just the sound of crickets and the Texas wind. He walked into his barn-turned gym, walls lined with old photos, championship belts, and movie posters. He stopped by one photo, a much younger Chuck standing barefoot on a karate mat, bowing to his opponent. He smiled. "Still learning, old man," he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. "Mr. Norris, I just wanted to say thank you again. Because of you, I started martial arts classes this week. My instructor told me discipline starts with respect. I told him I already learned that lesson from you." Chuck stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Proud of you, son. Keep walking the right path." Quietly, he set the phone down, took a deep breath, and stepped onto his practice mat. Even at his age, his movements were smooth, powerful, controlled. Every kick, every punch, precise, calm, deliberate. Because for Chuck, the fight was never about defeating others. It was about mastering himself. Have you ever had a moment when you realized staying calm was harder, but stronger, than fighting back? Tell me your story in the comments. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than fists. The next morning, a letter arrived at the diner. Sally opened it curiously. It was from Chuck. Inside was a short handwritten note. "To the people of Miller's Diner, thank you for your kindness that day. Keep serving good coffee and keep reminding folks that respect never goes out of style." Taped to the note was a small photo, Chuck smiling beside the teens, all of them holding mugs of coffee, heads bowed slightly like old friends. Sally hung it on the wall beside the cash register. Underneath she wrote in marker, "Respect, and it starts here." Soon people began taking pictures beside it, families, travelers, even bikers passing through. It became a symbol, not of celebrity, but of character. Back at his ranch, Chuck sat on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. His dog lay by his feet, the world quiet and golden. He turned to the camera crew filming a final clip for a documentary about the incident. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "the internet keeps calling me a hero, but heroes aren't people who never lose their temper. They're people who control it." He looked straight into the camera, eyes calm but sharp. "Anyone can be tough, but it takes real courage to stay kind." A pause. Then he chuckled lightly. "And if kindness doesn't work, well, then I'll roundhouse kick him in the heart." The crew laughed. The perfect mix of humor and wisdom. Classic Chuck Norris. As the screen faded to black, his voice continued softly. "In a world full of noise, be the quiet that teaches. In a world full of fists, be the open hand that helps." The final shot. Miller's Diner, bathed in warm morning light. The camera zooms in on the photo, Chuck and the boys, smiling together, proof that one act of grace can change 1,000 hearts. But as the world cheered his message, one final twist was still to come, something even Chuck himself didn't expect. A few weeks after the interview, life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after inspiring millions. Miller's Diner was busier than ever. People from all over the country stopped by just to sit where Chuck Norris once sat, order the respect breakfast, and snap a photo beside the famous wall. Sally, the waitress, smiled every time someone asked about that day. He was calm, she'd say. Calmer than anyone I've ever met. But one morning, a thick envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Miller's Diner. Attention, Sally. Inside was a short letter in Chuck's neat handwriting. Sally, I've been thinking about that date, about those boys, the people watching, and what it all meant. I believe the best lessons shouldn't end with words. They should grow into something real. There was also a check attached, a large one, and underneath it a note that read, "Let's start a scholarship. Call it the Respect Foundation. Help local kids learn discipline, kindness, and purpose. Because strength isn't about how hard you hit, it's about how you lift others." Sally wiped away a tear. That diner, once the scene of a moment of shame, was now becoming the birthplace of something powerful, something that would outlive the story itself. Word spread fast. Within days, donations poured in. Martial arts academies, schools, and community leaders all joined the cause. Even Ryan and his friends volunteered to help. They began mentoring younger kids, teaching them what Chuck had taught them: patience, respect, and humility. When reporters asked Ryan why he was helping, he said softly, "Because one man's calm changed my life. If we can pass that on, maybe we can change someone else's." The foundation grew quickly, sponsoring youth programs, fitness classes, and even self-defense workshops for underprivileged kids. And at every event, a framed photo of Chuck Norris hung proudly on the wall with his quote beneath it: "Real power is staying kind when the world gives you every reason not to." Then came the final twist, one that melted hearts everywhere. Months later, Miller's Diner received one more surprise visitor. A young man in a suit walked in holding a small box. Sally recognized him instantly. It was Ryan. He smiled shyly. "Hi, Miss Sally. I came to drop something off." Inside the box was a black belt, his first one, and beneath it a note addressed to Chuck. "Sir, I earned this today. Not for fighting, but for learning to control myself. Thank you for showing me that real warriors fight with peace." Sally took a photo of the letter and sent it to Chuck. Hours later, she got a reply. A single message from Chuck Norris that read, "Tell him I'm proud. He's already a black belt, in character." Weeks later, during a live charity event, Chuck shared Ryan's story with the audience. He smiled, his voice calm but full of pride. The world thought this was a story about a prank, but it was really a story about redemption. And if one act of patience can turn anger into growth, then maybe there's still hope for all of us. The crowd rose to their feet in applause, and as the lights dimmed, Chuck gave his signature smile and added one last line. "Remember, being strong doesn't mean you win fights. It means you don't need to." If you believe the world needs more kindness, type respect in the comments, because true strength isn't about power and it's about peace.